What is the truth behind this study? I'm George Strait, and I've come here to Macon County, Alabama, where it all took place, to try to find out. The experiment was called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It was authorized by the U.S. Public Health Service, paid for with taxpayers' dollars, and conducted by government doctors. Now, the aim was to learn more about how syphilis, this deadly and debilitating disease, actually attacks the body. The method was to withhold treatment from 400 men, all poor, all black, and all deceived by the promise of care. Now, the medical establishment has never denied the facts of this tragedy, which for many has come to symbolize medical misconduct and a disregard for human rights in the name of science. But the question remains, how could this experiment have happened?
Come to learn of the experiment, and how do you feel about it now?
I came to learn about the experiment through the news, actually. Like, I was waking up for breakfast with my family, and then my son brought it in the paper, and I was just looking at it, and I was like, what? Because I remember being tested on by all these doctors, and they told me they were like helping us. So when I heard about it, I was just actually really shocked.
Wow. How did you come to learn of this experiment, and how do you feel about it now?
I am outraged. Can you imagine going to a hospital for treatment and putting all of your trust in the doctor to only find out by your next door neighbor that the treatment was not ethical? I can't believe this. I'm hurt. I'm devastated. My family's distraught. I don't know what to do at this point.
It would have been enormously frightening to have the diagnosis of syphilis for really two reasons. One, because of the many symptoms and terrifying consequences that syphilis truly does have. And secondly, because there had been so much attention to syphilis and the creation of what people called syphilophobia. People thought it was everywhere, and people were horrified to learn that they might be infected, and it was so highly stigmatized because of its association with illicit sexual behavior.
Does the incident cause you to feel a way towards participation in health-related research?
Well, I'd have to say no, it doesn't actually. I mean, it does make me feel uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, I just decided to, when I go to the doctors, I just try to find as much information related to the treatment as I can, because that's all I can do. I'm not going to stress myself out. If I stress myself out for all these years, then I'll just lose all my hair.
The U.S. Public Health Service was run by idealistic physician scientists. They were eager to use the combined weapons of germ theory, sanitation, basic research, and public education to fight and conquer disease. Syphilis, with more than 300,000 new cases every year, was an early target. As part of this campaign, the Public Health Service launched 6 pilot projects in the South in predominantly poor black communities. These efforts were partially supported by state and philanthropic funds. One project was in Macon County, Alabama. In 1930, government doctors arrived with high hopes and an ambitious plan to diagnose and treat as many as 10,000 people. Effective therapy would require an arduous and sometimes painful course of treatment with toxic compounds administered over a year and a half. Initial blood testing revealed an epidemic rate of syphilis in Macon County. 35% of the black men and women here were infected. But the Public Health Service had underestimated the costs of providing treatment to so many, and they hadn't counted on the Great Depression lasting so long. By the end of 1931, there was not enough money to continue the program. Of the thousands infected, the Public Health Service had treated only 1,400, and of these, many did not receive the full course of therapy. The government doctors pulled out, leaving the men and women here to the mercy of the disease. But this was not to be the end of the Macon County Syphilis Project.
Does the incident cause you to feel a way towards participation in health-related research?
I won't do it. I absolutely will not put my life and the life of many others at risk for research. It's inhumane. We can't just leave this in the past.
The question emerged from theories that there were fundamental genetic and physical differences between the races.
When you look at many of the medical writings at the turn of the century, especially those of white physicians and nurses and public health experts, the focus is on genetics, that somehow that black people were inherently syphilitic, that black people were inherently tuberculous, that black people had smaller brains, and because they had smaller brains, they couldn't control their lust. They were immoral.
There was also a widely held belief that syphilis in blacks was not a deadly disease. Clark hoped that debunking this would free up new funds for treatment programs. He knew he needed local help to implement his plan, and he turned to Macon County's brightest light, the Tuskegee Institute. Founded by Booker T. Washington to educate freed slaves and their descendants, the school had garnered the trust of the local community and the respect of the nation. Tuskegee was committed to the health needs of blacks and had a well-equipped hospital, laboratories, and a highly trained medical staff, all the facilities needed for a research study. And here was a major research project, an unparalleled scientific opportunity. At least that's the way the designers of the experiment described it. For its part, the school had long depended on the moral support and financial backing of the federal government. So when the Public Health Service came asking for help, it was difficult to say no. In the autumn of 1932, the university agreed to collaborate, and the syphilis treatment program was transformed into a scientific study designed to collect data. And the men of Macon County were changed unwittingly from patients to experimental subjects. No voice was raised in protest. No questions asked about the welfare or the rights of the men.
We can't just leave this in the past. Many of us died, many of whom I knew. They took advantage of us. We have to address this now, and I will not participate in any research for the sake of all of our lives.
Possible death or liberty. This is the risk 10 convicts are volunteering to take in the fight against sleeping sickness.
We're doing this for the sake of humanity.
In the 30s, there were no regulations to ensure that subjects were fully informed about experiments or protected from unnecessary risks. This study was designed to investigate sleeping sickness.
The test begins. In glass tubes with gauze at the ends are mosquitoes which were fed on victims of the St. Louis epidemic. Will their bite affect these men? That is science's question.
Can you feel a mosquito biting?
Yes, ma'am.
Research subjects will most likely come from those who are in some ways not only medically disadvantaged, but socially disadvantaged in one way or another. And therefore, the burden of human experimentation historically has often rested on those who are in some manner least able to protect themselves from this kind of investigation.
How do you feel today about the experiment?
Looking back at it now, I believe that we are all wrong. It's really hard for me to wake up every day in the morning and look at myself in the mirror. I feel terribly sad for all of the all of the men who died during the course of this experiment, and I believe that we shouldn't have done the experiment at all.
The experiment was tragic. Numerous people died, families were affected. It's clearly understandable why no one would forgive us, but with science, sacrifices have to be made.
With promises of free treatment for bad blood, the doctors recruited 400 men never before treated, and now in the later stages of syphilis. Much was already known about the natural history of this disease. Syphilis is most contagious in the first weeks and months and is spread sexually and congenitally from mother to fetus. In its early stages, rashes, headaches, fevers, and pain are common. Then syphilis enters a symptomless latency period which lasts from months to decades, and for a lucky minority, never ends. But for the majority, there will be a relapse, the violent storm of late syphilis. Now the disease attacks the brain, internal organs, and joints of its most unfortunate victims. As the Tuskegee study began, the government doctors cataloged the effects of latent and late syphilis. They conducted blood tests, detailed physical exams, and x-rays.
Do you understand the ethical issues involved with this experiment?
Of course. Every doctor takes an oath prior to practice, and even without taking an oath, I think it can be clearly seen that there were many unethical issues about the experiment, such as race, consent, and other factors.
Do you understand the ethical issues involved with this experiment?
Well, of course, informed consent exists. Every doctor should abide by that law, but I don't understand why people think this is race-driven, because as far as I'm concerned, race wasn't a factor when we chose the population.
That shows you some of the deception and deceit involved in the study. And these are physicians saying this, so that it has a certain power and authority of physicians saying this.
Men from this community were told that the government doctors had come to help them. They were never informed of the real purpose of the research project. They were never told the true nature of their illness, nor the dangers they faced. According to the original proposal, the Tuskegee study was to be finished at the end of 6 months. Instead, it was just beginning. Government doctors became fascinated by the early data. They saw indications that blacks suffered the same complications from syphilis as whites. That was exciting because it contradicted the prevailing wisdom that somehow syphilis was different and less deadly among blacks. The investigators convinced themselves that their research could answer other more general questions as well. In their mind, they thought they could break new scientific ground in the study of syphilis. Their excitement propelled them forward as the Tuskegee study was poised to make its most fateful turn.
Do you think you will be able to forgive those involved?
Yes. I was raised to believe that hate only stems more hate. Through fear, there's only more fear. If you can't forgive someone, then how do you expect others to forgive you when you yourself do wrong? No one is perfect. Everyone made issues, and I'm pretty sure that after all this time that they've acknowledged what they've done. A lot of lives were lost. Many of who I knew. And while that does hurt me, and I still think about it every day, I can't keep looking at the past as just a tragic time in my life to the point that it continues to haunt me.
Do you think you will be able to forgive those involved?
At this point, I can't really be sure. I know it's the morally right thing to do, but at the same time, so many lives were taken that for me to just forgive as if nothing happened would be an insult to my race. What separates them from any other murderer in America? While they murdered and used us and noticed that we were dying, they kept using us. They didn't stop. As far as I can see, there is no difference. Sorry to say, but at this point, I kind of just want to move to Canada, where there's free healthcare and no strings attached.
These were men who weren't going to question the system, who weren't going to question the government doctors, who weren't going to be out there picketing and writing and protesting about it. These were men in Macon County, Alabama. Who's going to speak for them?
Do you really not see how race was an ethical concern in this?
No, of course not. I think people are just complaining about something, just to complain about.
Why did you do this?
Well, it's my job, and even though I know it's wrong, it's my job to create change. And through this experiment, we've actually learned a lot about syphilis, and this experiment can actually help us in further research and studies and other medical issues.
In the early years, the findings were sometimes also reported to Congress, but no one inside the medical establishment or government questioned the merits of the study.
This was not some mad scientist in the basement doing this. that it was public information. And I think people did not raise issues about it because they didn't see anything wrong with it. The medical profession did not see anything wrong with it.
What are your final thoughts in regards to this experiment?
Overall, I just feel it's over and done with. As long as people can understand that at the end of the day, all lives matter. It doesn't matter like where you're from. We're all human. So if people can get that through their head, I don't see any issues anymore.
The cruelty and inhumanity only shows what kind of world we live in. Who's to say that this patient goes? Who's to say that this patient dies? It clearly wasn't us. This was not okay. We need to do something about this. Something has to change. Someone needs to be here to advocate for us, because clearly our voices are not being heard. Black Lives Matter.
If I could, I would undo everything that we've done in the past. But every day, I try to strive for the best and to make up for the past. And it's very unfortunate of all the lives that were lost. Thank you.
The past is the past. If we didn't do it, then another group of doctors would have done it. But I feel extremely bad, but I can't change the past.
Now, Lord, we want to thank Thee, because these thy people have come so far in this undertaking. Pray our Father that would bless them, guide them to and from that place we're born.
Today, Herman Shaw celebrates his 90th birthday. He's had a long life and, for the most part, a healthy one. Shaw and Howard and Pollard are among the lucky ones. The government gambled with their lives, but these men survived. Others were not so fortunate. According to government reports, of the 400 men in the study, at least 24 and perhaps as many as 100 died as a result of untreated syphilis. Many others suffered the grim consequences of rheumatism, blindness, and insanity. Most would have been helped or saved by medical intervention.
So the tragedy is those men can't speak today, and I speak for them. But if they could speak from the grave, they would say, my government should never have done it.
To the survivors, to the wives and family members, the children and the grandchildren, I say what you know. No power on earth can give you back the lives lost, the pain suffered, the years of internal torment and anguish. What was done cannot be undone. But we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
Yeah, that's all we need.